Okay, hello everyone. I hope you all have had a very nice summer and now it's back to business again. And we start this fall with a webinar, Q&A webinar on Turkey KKDIK registration. So KKDIK meaning also reach in Turkish. So you ask questions and we answer, and this will be a live webinar. So today we have two presenters, experts, the usual suspects when it comes to REACHLaw webinars and Turkey-related topics. So Sibel Kilic and me, Frederik Johanson. And if I ask you, Sibel, please, if you can introduce yourself briefly to the audience.
Hello everyone, my name is Sibel Kilic. I'm working as a director at REACHLaw Turkey, living in Istanbul, and I'm responsible for the team in Turkey. I am a chemist as a background and I hold a PhD in organic chemistry. In my career, I have been working on REACH since 2013 and then working on KKDIK since 2017. When the KKDIK regulation implemented in Turkey. So far, also considering the supply chain of the business, I have common understanding on REACH and REACH-like regulations globally. Thank you, Freddie.
Thank you, Sibel. And I'm Frederik Johanson. I'm a partner, head of sales at REACHLaw, chemical engineering by background. Have been working with REACH and Turkey KKDIK related topics for a long time. Turkey KKDIK since 2017, EU REACH actually since way before EU REACH even was in force. So a long background in chemical regulations and EHS. And of course, very happy to be here today to guide you through questions and answers related to Turkey KKDIK and specifically registrations thereof. So as with all our webinars there, we like to keep them interactive. And thank you to all of those who have sent questions in advance. So we try to answer all of those, or at least most of them, as relevant to this topic of this webinar today. In any case, you can also send in questions using the chat function in the GoToWebinar panel. We'll try to answer those in the Q&A session. And of course, those questions that you sent in advance, we will answer those as far as possible, and for those that we have not and cannot answer in this webinar, we'll come back to you later on. And that also goes for the questions we can't answer if you send them by the chat function. And the recording of this webinar will be made available on our YouTube channel called REACHLaw Talks, which I invite you all to have a look and subscribe if you like. And of course, in any case, we appreciate very much if you can send us feedback. Thank you very much. So the agenda for today will be as follows. So of course, we'll just go through quickly who we are at REACHLaw, what we do. Then we'll give you a quick overview of Turkey KKDIK, so Turkey REACH as someone or some people call it. Then we'll look at the registration process, give you an overview thereof, and also the current status of that registration process, which I believe a lot of people are interested in, at least based on the questions we received. And then we'll go into the main section of this webinar, which is obviously the Q&A session, where we will spend most of the time. We'll end with some closing remarks, and we believe that the webinar will take around an hour, but I think learning from past experience, it will probably go a bit over that. So please bear with us. And of course, if you need to leave, then you can of course leave and look at the recording later on our YouTube channel. So REACHLaw, who are we? What do we do? So we provide support for REACH and REACH-like chemical regulations globally. And for the moment, this encompasses, of course, the EU REACH regulation, and also, of course, Turkey KKDIK or Turkey REACH, as mentioned, but also the UK REACH regulation, which is also in force already. Then India REACH is something that is coming up at some point, which we'll also be providing support for. And K-REACH, meaning Korea REACH, is of course something that is already in force. And we also provide support services related that, albeit through partners local partners. But for UK, Turkey, and the EU, we natively support these jurisdictions ourselves, because we have local offices in these regions, as you can see on the map. So Sibel mentioned she is at the office in Istanbul in Turkey. I'm here in Helsinki, or actually in Espoo in Finland at the head office. And then we have also an office in Manchester, UK, servicing our UK Reach clients. And we have a small office also in Brussels, and then a bigger one in New Delhi, servicing Indian customers for the most part. And all of these offices, through these offices, of course, we provide only representative services where applicable for the said jurisdictions. So in general, just so what we do is we provide market access services for chemical products in these different jurisdictions. So one of our main services, core services, is providing only representative services. In this case, today we're talking about Turkey, so in Turkey, but also in the EU and the UK, as mentioned, and through a partner in South Korea. And we provide then a full set of services from cradle to grave, so to speak, starting with all the basic registrations, going into the more demanding work, such as lead registration and authorization cases, applications for authorization thereof, and of course providing consultancy services and consultancy support on various technical, chemical, and of course to some degree legal interpretations and so forth. For Turkey, main services are on the screen. As mentioned, only representative services through our office in Istanbul. And then at the moment, of course, it is still possible to pre-register, as you will see in a few slides. And obviously register, doing the co-registration by end of next year, as well as the lead registration. All of these services we provide natively here at REACHLaw for customers needing KKDIK support, and of course also providing support for consortia and lead registration management, the CIF management thereof, and all the usual SDS work and so forth. We'll not go into the details here. I invite you please to be in touch with us for more details on our services related to everything we do, of course. But in this case, of course, Turkey KKDIK. So we really specialize in chemical regulatory compliance and sustainability. That's what we do. That's our niche. Albeit, as mentioned before, I think this niche is getting wider by the minute, more or less. So, as mentioned, we also have our YouTube channel called REACHLaw Talks, where we post dedicated YouTube content. I think there was a video posted yesterday on chemical risk management. I invite you to have a look at that. And of course, this webinar will be there also, as well as all our other webinars. And as mentioned, dedicated content. So please have a look if you like, give a thumbs up, and do subscribe. So what's happening next on the regulatory front, focusing now on the immediate REACH-like chemical regulations. So India, as mentioned, it's something that we're following at the moment. It looks like it's postponed for some time. When that enters into force is anyone's guess, but we'll monitor the situation and of course provide updates as forms of newsletters and webinars as things progress. In South Korea, the registration deadline, next registration deadline is for the 100 to 1,000 ton substances, and that is end of 2024, so there's a bit of time for that. But then in the UK, for UK REACH purposes, there's actually quite a lot happening at the moment. It's still possible to late notify substances under certain criteria. But the big news, I guess, is that there's been a discussion and a consultation has ended pertaining to the possible postponement of the registration deadlines that were proposed in the original legal text, with 3 additional years for the first deadline and 1 year or 2 years for the subsequent deadlines. But this is at the moment under discussion, and we'll see how things progress. But in the meanwhile, already certain lead registrants have started work on lead dossiers and preparing for the registration phase, such as REACHLaw. We've, for example, already lead registered substances for UK REACH purposes. Anyway, I will not go into the details here. You can contact us for additional information, and follow us, of course, on YouTube for additional content. On this slide, I just wanted to highlight that we are very active in participating and sponsoring different events globally. So if you are at any of these events, such as, for example, the next regulatory summit in Europe, in Brussels, end of September, then we will be there. So if you're there, please come and have a chat with us. We'd love to talk about all things regulatory compliance related and more, obviously. We'll not go into the details here, but you can see that we will be in many events during the fall where you can catch us in person. So before going into the context, just wanted to say that, of course, any actions that you may take based on the presentation you see here and this webinar is, of course, on your own responsibility. If you want dedicated advice under specific to you, and of course under let's say liability clause and stuff like that, then you have to solicit us directly as a consultant. So bear that in mind as a disclaimer for this webinar, and also note the copyright information. Okay, Sibel, if you would go through the Turkey KKDIK overview part next. So thank you. And let me know when to change slides, obviously.
Thank you, Frederik. Yeah, starting with the overview. And then KKDIK regulation is actually been in force since 2017 already, so there are certain transitional provisions that apply, such as the pre-registration phase and then the registration phase. We will look at these during the next slide. So the KKDIK acronym comes from the translated into English as the Regulation on Chemicals, Registration, Evaluation, Authorization and Restrictions. So very similar to the REACH acronym. Obviously, it's in Turkish. That's where the KKDIK comes from. For your information, that also the counterpart of the authority side is the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and the Climate Change. And next slide. And so the basic requirements are as with EU REACH. The requirement to pre-register and then register substances manufactured in or imported into Turkey at 1 ton or more per year, unless exempted from the KKDIK registration requirements. So there is same requirement saying that no data, no market, which essentially means that if you don't provide the information about your substances, in other words, pre-register and then register your substances within the information required, you will not have a market in Turkey. And then next slide, please. The KKDIK regulation is a long regulation because it's essentially a copy of the EU REACH regulation and translated obviously to Turkish language with the same additional amendments to suit the Turkish market and the timelines. So go actually here as many times over that. If you know EU REACH, then you will know the Turkey REACH, so Turkey KKDIK to a high degree. And next. Here I will not go in details, but looking at the scope, we can say that 99% of the substances are within the scope of the KKDIK regulation, meaning that all of these substances in one or another way have to comply with the KKDIK regulation and the requirements. So essentially, we can almost say that all substances, unless specifically exempted, are within the scope of the KKDIK regulation. And next slide. So the threshold for substances required a KKDIK pre-registration and registration when manufactured in or imported into Turkey is 1 ton or more per year. Next. So we will just look at the only representative. We would like to highlight that it is good for you to understand as a non-Turkish manufacturer or as a non-Turkish formulator, you can assign an only representative in Turkey to take care on KKDIK importer obligations. So this is pre-registration and then registration. So this is again the same setup as it was in EU REACH purposes. So when you select an owner representative, they must be a Turkish company and also have a sufficient background in the practical handling of substances and information related to the substances. Next slide. Here we can go shortly to introduce the KKS. The translation means Chemical Registration System, and as short it is the KKS. It is an online hybrid system combining REACH IT, a YPLIT and KEZAR tool, and everything is online, so you cannot use it offline or download any dossier or cannot use as an application as it is used in Europe. So everything is online and everything is of course in Turkish language. And here you have to have Turkish citizenship in able to create and access for this account. For those who are in Turkey and not create an account yet, should know that it may take up to 3 weeks to activate the account. So you can access the KKS system by using this link below, but you should create a company account on ECBC and then access to the KKS system. And this is from my side, Frederik. Thank you.
Thank you, Sibel. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the KKDIK registration process and status today. And as said, I'll try to do this quickly so we have as much time as possible for the Q&A part. So all substances at 1 ton or more that are not specifically exempt from the registration requirement that are manufactured in Turkey or imported into Turkey would need to be and will need to be registered by end of next year. And the tonnage bands defining the data requirements for the registration are the same as the EU, so 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000 and over 1,000 tons. And you can register substances as a full substance, which is the normal or the usual case. But you can also, if you are a manufacturer in Turkey, you can register these as an on-site isolated intermediate if it is intended to be transformed into another substance under strictly controlled conditions. Or then in some cases, of course, you can transport intermediates, isolated intermediates from a site to another, or import these into Turkey, and these can be also then registered as transported isolated intermediate, albeit if you want to benefit from reduced data requirements and reduced fees, then the strictly controlled conditions need to apply in the whole supply chain. And this is the same requirements as in EU REACH. And as mentioned by Sibel, submissions are done through the KKS system in Turkish language. So the deadlines are all the same for all tonnage bands under KKDIK. So this is a bit different from all the other regulations, REACH-like chemical regulations we have and we touched upon earlier, whereby the deadlines are staggered in succession depending on the tonnage band being the highest. Data requiring registrations need to be registered first, and then subsequently the lower data requirements. But in Turkey, everything is done by the same deadline, which is end of December next year. And the reasoning for this was that back in the day when the law was drafted was that all data is already available from EU REACH purposes, so you might as well have all the registration deadlines at the same time. We'll not spend more time on this. In Turkey, you also have the same joint submission concept apply as you have, for example, in EU REACH, which means that you need to appoint a lead registrant who submits the bulk of the data on the substance, so Phys-Chem, Tox, Ecotox information as applicable as part of the lead dossier, and then all other companies aiming to register the same substance join this joint registration called the joint submission, headed by the lead registrant, and purchases of letter of access for the purpose of getting access to the data that is submitted by the lead registrant. So this is the same as EU REACH, and of course all of these have the same registration deadline as mentioned earlier, end of next year. And data in this joint submission needs to be, of course, shared in a fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory way, similar and the same way as it's done under EU REACH purposes, for those of you who have been working with EU REACH in this respect. And joint submissions are mandatory unless you get a special permission to submit the individual submissions, but I believe they will try to push everyone to submit joint submissions, because that's the way EU REACH has also progressed. So then maybe some of you may be wondering what happens then 1st of January 2024 if I have to register a substance at more than 1 ton annually, which is not exempt from registration requirements, and 99% or 99.9% of substances are not exempt. So what you have to do is you first need to submit an inquiry and then register the substance according to KKDIK, and only once the whole process is complete, meaning you have a registration number, it has been accepted and you have a registration number and so forth, can you place the substance on the Turkish market at 1 ton or more annually. So come 1st of January, it will work more or less the same as EU REACH does today. So just quickly, what does a lead registrant do? They take upon themselves the responsibility in this SIEF, so the Substance Information Exchange Forum. So the group of companies who have pre-registered the same substance, have the same substance identity for the purpose of registration, is to manage and lead and coordinate the work. So get organized for the purpose of jointly registering the substance, then clarify the substance identity, collect, of course, information and all the required data to fill the data requirements, so which increase by the tonnage, annual tonnage you are aiming to register. Then, of course, share cost transparently, fairly, and non-discriminatorily, as mentioned. And this process is usually done through a letter of access system, whereby you purchase, as a co-registrant, you purchase the letter of access for the right to refer to the joint submission and the data thereof, so that you can join it and submit your co-registration. We'll look at that in the next slide. And then, of course, the lead registrant has the responsibility to prepare, manage, and submit this joint registration to the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change in, of course, good time before the deadline next year, so that all the co-registrants have enough time to submit their own joint submission and submit their co-registrations also before the same deadline. And of course, they will have the obligation to keep this joint registration, joint submission up to date, and keep all records and communicate with authorities where applicable. So already touched upon the co-registrants. They also have the responsibility to cooperate in the SIEF, and of course are responsible for their own registration, agree also on the substance identity as proposed by the lead registrant, and then of course provide feedback if those need to be adjusted. They need to share data and share the costs, and as mentioned through this letter of access process, compile and submit their own co-registration as part of the joint submission, and submit this also before the deadline next year. They also have the obligation to keep the dossier up to date and keep records for 10 years and communicate with authorities where need be. If they, for example, if the authorities approach them to ask something, you have the obligation to reply. Everyone is always very interested in cost. We'll go into this in a bit more detail a bit later on. But at the time of writing, preparing this slide 2 days ago, the exchange rate, if you compare the registration fees that you are paying to the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization as part of registering your substances, the registration fees were in euros for 1 to 10 ton or intermediate registrations at any tonnage band, it was 900 lira, which is around 50 euros. Then increasing 10 to 100 tons, it's around 113 euros, 2,100 Turkish lira. 100 to 1,000 tons would be 6,000 Turkish lira, equivalent to around 324 euros. And then for the higher tonnage, the highest tonnage band, over 1,000 tons, it would be 14,400 Turkish lira, which equates to approximately 777 euros. So you can see that the registration fees are very much smaller than for EU REACH or for UK REACH for that matter. And these are for large company size. So if you are an SME, you will get even further reduced fees. Okay, so some quick statistics where we are. So till date, approximately 250,000 pre-registrations have been submitted to the ministry. So that's quite a lot, and this of course constitutes a lot of unnecessary pre-registrations and pre-registrations for substances that do not exist or do not require pre-registration, or just pre-register for the sake of having the flexibility before the registration deadline. So this does by far not mean that 256,000 registrations will be received. So there's a lot of how do you say, hot air in those numbers when comparing to the actual number of registrations that will be submitted, which will be determined. So you can see, for example, that when you submit the pre-registration in the KKS system, there will be a reference substance prepared, and if you look at all the different reference substances, different substances that were created as part of the pre-registration process, it comes to approximately 37,000 different substances. So this is already much more than the different substances, for example, registered under EU REACH, which is around 23,000. So you can see there's a lot of non-relevant stuff there. But anyway, for those substances that have been pre-registered, there are around 2,500 lead registrants have already been nominated. Out of the portfolio that REACHLaw is following closely, we more than 2,000 substances. We know that around 700 lead registrants have been nominated as part of that portfolio, including REACHLaw. So by end of August, we know that a bit more than 400 lead registrations have been already submitted to the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, and it still looks at this stage that most of the lead registrations have been submitted by only representatives for non-Turkish based companies. So typically companies that were either EU REACH lead registrants or like companies with high interest for those substances for the Turkish market. So if we look at and keep the numbers in mind, so where do we think we are on the road to registration pertaining to KKDIK? And I warn you already that this is highly speculative, so take it with a huge pinch of salt. But if we do some comparison with EU REACH and the EU REACH registration statistics, we know that a bit more than 23,000 substances have been registered. So different substances have been registered for EU REACH. And making some assumptions, calculations, I will not go into how we came to this. You will see it in the slides and invite you to have a look at it in more detail. We have back calculated that approximately 22% of this would essentially fall off, would not be registered for the Turkish market, which would mean that around 5,000 substances would fall off, which would in turn mean that we estimate, and I said highly speculative, that maybe up to 18,000 different substances would be subject to KKDIK registration. Substances that are on the Turkish market at more than 1 ton per year. So what does this mean? Looking at the statistics from the previous slide, it means that approximately 14% of all these substances would have a lead registrant nominated. So that means that 15,500 substances are still to go. That's quite a lot. And then, of course, looking at how many lead dossiers have already been submitted, and that's approximately 2%, a bit more, which would equate to 98% still to go, around 17,600 substances still to be submitted, lead registrant dossiers still to be submitted. So you can see that if we look at these numbers, and even if the number of 18,000 different substances would be less, for example, 15,000, we would still see that we are quite far from the goal. But there's still time, but still, there's a lot further to go. So what's happening now for KKDIK registration? So of course, it is still possible to late pre-register, and we know that these are still ongoing, and it's possible to do this by all the way until end of next year. So it's good to understand that essentially no manufacturer import is allowed if you don't have this valid pre-registration. For lead registrations, we know that nominations are slowly picking up. We're in an active phase in that respect, and this especially applies then to these companies or substances that are of importance for international companies, and for which there is, for example, an EU REACH lead registrant who is also acting on the Turkish market. So the summa summarum is that this is picking up, albeit we'll see if it's picking up enough momentum to get to the goal by registering by end of next year. And of course, lead registration dossier preparations are in let's say in an active phase also, albeit of course we are still missing a lot of lead registrants. So for many substances it's pending, but it is picking up, albeit slowly. And of course, letter of access is very few of those are still available, but they are slowly becoming available to a greater number. AFCO registrations planning is happening at the moment, and looking at budgets. And of course, it's difficult to look at budgets if you don't know what the letter of access costs are. So that's a bit of a catch-22. So a lot of our clients, and I saw it also in the questions, is that they want to know what the costs are before committing to things. And if there are no lead registrants, then of course there are no letter of accesses, and that makes a bit of a predicament. So the process is really hampered by the lack of available letter of accesses and lack of lead registrants. That's obviously a big problem, which hopefully will sort itself out. We'll see about that. So what's happening now also for the KKDIK registrations front is that actually a few days ago, the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization was sending out invitations for lead registrants and only representatives to meet at the ministry in October or November, date to be determined. And people who got the invite could respond at whether they want to join, and if they want, they need to provide details of themselves. So essentially register to this event. And the idea, we believe, with this event is for the ministry to get an understanding of where the companies are with their processes, what are the bottlenecks in the process, how to speed up the lead registration work, and discuss what may be to do with missing lead registrant cases, meaning where a lead registrant has not been nominated and so forth. So we don't know the agenda, but these, we believe, are topics that will be discussed in this meeting. And of course, REACHLaw will be joining this, and we will keep you up to date through our different channels of what's going on, because I think this will be an interesting and of course an important meeting to see where things are, and of course also for the ministry to understand where things are. Okay, so then coming to the main part. I hope we went a bit over time with the intro part, so to speak, but I think it's important to go through some of the latest developments because those will answer some of your questions. But now we'll go into the actual questions, the Q&A session, and we'll do it so that I will go through the questions, and then we'll see. I will essentially assign the person, so it's Sibel or myself who will answer the questions, so in rather sporadic order. So we have included the questions in the slides, and please note that these questions have been consolidated because we have received a lot of questions formulated differently for the same topics. So you will see, maybe you see words from your question or not, but essentially the context is there. So the first question actually is a set of 3 questions, which I will ask my colleague Sibel to answer, but I'll just read out the question as you can also see on the slide. So any chance that the KKDIK registration deadline would be extended considering how low the submission activities have been in general? And then has the ministry any view on the slow progress of EU consortia and leads in determining costs for KKDIK? Are there any rumors of the ministry considering again any extension of the registration window? And then the final question in this similar type of questions is that KKDIK is a challenge for importers of finished products in Turkey, probably a challenge for many other also. They have the registration obligation, but not the data or resources. Have the Turkish authorities considered extending deadlines or new model for registration as for UK REACH? So Sibel, would you like to tackle these 3 questions all in once?
Yes, very sure. I will try to just cover this. There are no discussion ongoing about extending the registration deadlines in Turkey so far. What will happen closer to the deadline if things are still not progressing enough for KKDIK is not known. By the way, the authority and associations in Turkey are organizing meetings where the industry can come together with the authority and transmit their experiences, difficulties within the KKDIK related processes. Then assuming that authority is aware of the process status. And the latest call, as you mentioned, has been announced by the authority to the lead companies for the meeting. It will be held in Ankara in coming months. Yeah.
Thank you, Sibel. I think that answers, and we'll see how things develop, but I'm sure they will be very hesitant to provide any or say that there will be any extension of any deadlines. And if for whatever reason there would be an extension, and we're not saying that there will, but if there would, I'm sure they would say it at the last possible minute, because otherwise companies would just say, we can relax and not do anything at the moment, just wait. So they don't want that. And this is pure speculation, obviously, from my part. Okay, additional questions. I will take these. So the 2 first ones, 4 and 5, are very similar, again, consolidated based on many questions. The absolute favorite question was the extension of the deadlines that just got covered. The other one is essentially on what happens if there's no lead and related questions. So the question is, one of the question is, what's your experience up to now? There are many substances where no communication has been started, no lead registrant is available. How will companies manage to register by the deadline? And a related question, and essentially the same, if no one wants to be the lead registrant, how should we proceed? So I'll take these. Obviously someone has always to be a lead registrant. So if there is no lead registrant available, then I suggest that you become the lead registrant, or someone who is the least hates becoming a lead registrant the least, has the highest volume just takes the role and gets it done. I mean, someone always has to become the lead registrant. If no one becomes a lead, there is no joint submission. If there's no joint submission, there's no registration. If there's no registration, there is no market for that substance on the Turkish market at 1 ton or more come 2024. So it's just, if you are very reluctant and so forth, then you have to ask yourself, what is better? Shall I give up my business in Turkey or become the lead? And this answers question 4 and 5. Then we have question 6, which is related again. What to do if chosen lead registrant is not moving forward with the lead dossier preparation? So I would recommend just keeping up the pressure and demand the lead registrant to provide timetable of where they are with the work, and also provide information on when a letter of access will be available. If the progress is still slow and non-responsive, then I would recommend you turn to the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change for guidance, because they can, at the end of the day, of course, then take the lead role away from the current lead role, lead registrant, nominated lead registrant, if that one is not performing their duties. So I would say that if in the next couple of months the lead registrant is still dragging their feet and it's not clear what the timetable and so forth is, and you have still tried to push them to be more active, then I would say that you should turn to the ministry. And REACHLaw, for example, can help you with that. Put you in touch with the right people and so forth, if need be. Then we have a question on a lot of substances, again, a related question. So Sibel, I will ask you to take this one. So a lot of substances are still missing a lead registrant. What is the authorities doing in this respect? How is the awareness in Turkey regarding the regulations? So it's essentially 2 different questions. So Sibel, if you take this one.
Yeah, sure. For this one, yes, the industry is aware of the regulation, and awareness is going to increase within the time. Also, I can say that after a joint effort, if still there is no leads in the CF, the authority is suggesting members to apply to the authority with an official letter. This could be a way to approach on this matter. Yeah.
Thank you, Sibel. And then question 8. By the way, we have 37 questions here, so it'll take a while. So how to push pre-registrants to act as lead registrant to be elected and acting. So this relates to our answers earlier. So someone has to become it. So either you propose one of your competitors or whomever else is in the CF to become a lead registrant. Maybe you can have a poll to nominate someone as a lead, or at least try to get them to become a lead. And of course, then at the end of the day, why not you become the lead if no one else wants to? And of course, REACHLaw can help you with that if need be. Going forward, now looking at joint registrant and joint submission related questions. So the numbering continues, but the topics changed a bit. So I'll take this one also. Will tests need to be performed in Turkey? So no, they do not. So you can perform tests anywhere. Of course, if they are requiring GLP, then those have to be performed in a GLP certified laboratory. But of course, in most cases, we assume that the EU REACH data is available in one form or another from the existing lead registrant or EU lead registrant or consortium. So testing is probably not needed in like 99% of the cases, or probably even more. So that's that. And then we have question number 10. So I will ask Sibel to take this. The question is, test results or reports should be translated to Turkish, or can they be submitted in English?
Yeah, thank you, Fethi. Here, no need to translate the test reports. Only the robust study summaries will need to be in Turkish language. Just here also note for the analytical report defining substance ID, this can be in English language also. I hope this can clarify.
Yeah, thank you, Sibel. And next question, try to pick it up a bit. So this will be, I'll take this one. So under which conditions is it not possible to reuse data present in EU REACH dossiers, which are available to use for KKDIK dossiers? So as the data requirements are essentially, or they are the same in Turkey and the EU, all data can be used for KKDIK registration purposes. So the only condition I would see here is why it would not be possible to reuse is if you do not have the proper access rights to that data. So of course you cannot, if you are compiling a lead dossier in Turkey, you just can't take data. You have to have the permissions from the owners of that data. But other than that, there are no limitations, I would say, for the reuse of data, save the permissions to use it. So short and sweet answer, I guess. Number 12, is there any draft or proposal for guidance on data sharing in site in Turkey? Sibel, do you want to take this one?
Yes, Frederik. Yes, there is guidance on data sharing in the authority web page, defining the process generally, I can say.
Yeah, thank you. Going forward, so question 13. So this is also to you, Sibel, if you will. So the question is, is there a requirement to be in the tonnage band of your pre-registration, or can you import the substance at any tonnage band if it's pre-registered, or is the tonnage band only needed for full registration in 2023, of course? So,
okay, yeah, thank you, Frederik. The tonnage band is now a mandatory information within the pre-registration process and then the registration process as well. And then authority is expecting the imported or manufactured tonnage band to be submitted while pre-registering and then registering the substance, I can say.
Thank you, Sibel. And number 14, also for you, will there be improvement in the KKS to allow registrants to submit spontaneous updates without asking the ministry for access? So, please.
Yes. Yes, the updates are possible without asking the ministry for access. The related steps on how to update dossier can be found also in the KKS guidance, I can say. Yeah.
Thank you, Sibel. And number 15 question, and I'll take this one. So will the analytical tests and requirements for substance identification be the same as EU REACH? And the short answer is yes. And as Sibel already mentioned, you can use the same test reports even if they are in English for KKDIK purposes. So no need to redo any analytical tests or any test for that matter, as discussed already. Then we have question 16. I'll take this. So will Turkey KKDIK establish a robust CIF and consortia approach? So as mentioned earlier, of course, EU REACH and KKDIK are essentially identical when it comes to the registration process and the practical implementation thereof. So I mean, the approach is robust CIF and consortia approach. That would imply that the regulation per se has something to say about how to organize them, companies organize, and that is something that they do not do. They of course provide the rules of the game, but they do not say how you should, for example, organize yourself, except to say that, for example, data should be shared in a fair, transparent, non-discriminatory way, and so forth. So there is no separate way or no separate, let's say, process for establishing any of these. It's the same as for EU REACH. So it's up to the industry to get organized and work according to the requirements of the KKDIK regulation, if I now understand the question correctly. If not, please feel free to contact us and we will elaborate on this further. Okay, then we have question number 17 related to costs. So the question is, and this goes to myself, several of our raw material suppliers are not committed regarding their KKDIK registration intentions. Their current response is, when we know the cost, we will then decide whether to register. So what are the current costs of registration? This is a very extensive question, obviously, and something that we also get here a lot. So people, and as mentioned earlier, so people want to, and companies want to know what the costs are before they can commit to something. Obviously, if you are down the supply chain, if you are an importer in Turkey and so forth, and you get this outside and you want to have an OR in the supply chain, of course, this is difficult. Or if you're outside of Turkey and you're formulating and just want to have coverage for the substance in the formulation to be covered by an OR by the upstream supplier, and they say we don't know yet, then it's also troublesome. So this is quite a common thing to hear at the moment, unfortunately. But so what the costs are for registration, by far the biggest costs, if we are looking like from a co-registrant perspective, is of course buying the letter of access. And this letter of access can essentially be anything. And based on what we see at the moment, the few letter of accesses that are available have ranged from significantly reduced fees compared to letter of accesses in the EU to even higher letter of access fees in Turkey than they are in the EU for the same tonnage band. So this really is a question about the substance, the number of potential registrants, how the EU dossier was prepared, and the tests that were prepared for that, and so forth. And also who is selling, of course, the data. So when they are selling data or access to data for KKDIK purposes from outside of Turkey, they can essentially ask for any fee, then, because it does not have to be under fair, transparent, non-discriminatory conditions, because it's outside of the jurisdiction of Turkey. So I invite you to have a look at our other webinars that we've touched upon the subject from earlier this year and last year. So if you want to go and look at our REACHLaw Talks YouTube channel for more information. But as said, letter of access costs, data access costs are the highest contributors. And for co-registrants, as you saw, the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization, Climate Change fees, so the registration fees are very low. Then, of course, if you have a consultant, they will take something, but that will, I would say, pale in comparison with the letter of access fee, depending on the substance, of course. So a tricky question, but I would say data access, letter of access will be the highest cost. And this is something, if there's a lead registrant available, please check with them when this letter of access will be available. When will the cost be available for you to know, so that your suppliers or whomever can make the decision and commit to registering a substance, because otherwise it will be difficult throughout the supply chain in this case. So unfortunately, I can't give you a number. I can say it can be very expensive or not expensive, but it will always cost something. All right, some questions. That was a longer answer. Some questions related to only representatives. So again, we got several questions just consolidated into one question, number 18. So I asked Sibel to take this one, so I'll just read it out. So can you please advise if Turkish importer, so the customer downstream user, details are still required in the dossier in case of only representation? I think it should be said in case. Industry was lobbying to remove this requirement. So, and subsequent question, why is it needed as these are changing? So your customers are changing all the time. So what should we do with that information, update and so forth? And do they need an additional compliance certificate? So Sibel, please.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I can say that yes, including the importers to the registration dossier is still mandatory. And then also, yes, this is a dynamic process and information is changing. The authority here requesting spontaneous updates when there is the update, this update to be considered as a change in the dossier. They are expecting to update also this importers list in the dossier. And then I can say that different than the REACH IT here in the KK system, it is possible to monitor the companies, that all companies here in Turkey have to have their accounts also to be connected within the system. And this is why they need this. And for the other question, if I understand correctly, for the compliance certificate side, the volumes and the volume sold too are still requirements to be keep up to date by the owner representatives. Thus, volume covered certificates are still needed within the supply chain, I can say.
Thank you, Sibel. So this really means that if you are like if you have a dynamic supply chain, you change importers and all the time using an OR, then you need to update your dossier, or the OR needs to keep their dossier up to date. So that's good to know. Then we have question 19. Peculiar question in a sense. So the question is, and I'll take this one: is an only representative appointment possible for those substances in products which are imported into Turkey in less than 1 ton? In other words, which are not intended to be registered. So I mean, technically it would be possible. Yes, my question would be, why would you want to do that? From a legal perspective, and again, not being a lawyer and not taking responsibility in this case for what we say in this webinar, referring to back to our disclaimer, the scope of the only representative appointment is clearly limited or scoped to fulfilling the registration obligations under KKDIK, and this is obligations on the importers. And this is clearly defined in KKDIK Article 9, so similar to REACH Article 8, defining the only representative responsibility. So again, my counter question would be, why would you want to? I would suspect that this is a case where you are providing a mixture into Turkey, and then some of the substances covered by an OR and some of the substances are not, but maybe to hedge against the fact that maybe the tonnage ban will increase, you would want to have an OR in place. So it's an interesting question, but like from a purely legal interpretation, looking at the legal text, then this would fall outside. But of course, I would say from a practical perspective, I think there are no practical limitations for registering a substance under 1 ton. So I would say it would be possible. But I would advise the person submitting this question to being in contact with REACHLaw separately. We can maybe elaborate a bit more, but I think we need a bit more information maybe to give some practical advice, which I'm not giving here, obviously. So question number 20, how to handle indirect imports in case of polymer when neither the OR nor the customer knows the exact monomer composition. Yeah, so I would just drop the indirect import in this case away, because this is generic issue. If you want to have more let's say insight into indirect imports, I invite you to have a look at the webinar we had on only representative and CBI protection in June, which is also on the YouTube channel. So there we dive into indirect imports. But I think in this case, of course, it is a predicament if you do not know the composition of the substance that you are wanting to have OR coverage, or you want to report an OR for, because you are essentially a formulator if you are a manufacturer of polymers, or make a mixture out of polymers. But the problem is that if you don't know the substances, including this mixture, whether it be a polymer, mixture of polymers or any other substances for that matter, then of course you cannot pre-register those, you cannot appoint an only representative and so forth. So you could do some tests on that. Don't know whether you would get the results you want. What we recommend generically is to just try to get in touch with the upstream supplier, albeit it might be several tiers up the supply chain, just to get the information. And if they don't want to disclose it, it is possible to appoint a trustee in between. For example, if REACHLaw would become the only representative for the upstream supplier for these substances, or a substance that they don't want to disclose to their middlemen who are formulating mixtures, then of course we can keep that substance confidential, so that we will also function as a trustee in that respect. But this is again a very complicated case, so I invite you to also get in touch for more elaborate, let's say, replies. All right, going forward, time flies. We are over the hour, so excuse us for going a bit over time. As warned in the beginning, this is usually what happens. So if you are still here, thank you for bearing with us. And if you need to leave, please do and return to the recording later on. But for those of you who are here, thank you very much and appreciate it. Let's go forward. So looking at question number 21. So we're thinking about sending our chemical mixtures to the Turkish market and would like to know more about how this regulation affects export to Turkey. So I think this has been covered quite extensively in this webinar earlier, and also several other REACHLaw webinars on this subject. But of course, the main thing is if the substances in the mixture exceed the 1 ton threshold, then you are subject to KKDIK REACH registration, provided they are not specifically exempt. And I have a question coming up, an answer to that exemption question in the next slide. So if this is the case, then I recommend you appoint an only representative to cover the compliance work for Turkey KKDIK, and of course REACHLaw would be happy to help you with that. So just know that your substances are subject to KKDIK registration if they exceed the 1 ton threshold in that mixture. So the mixture in itself is not to be registered. It is the individual substances part of that mixture that exceed the 1 ton threshold. So number 22, and this goes, Sibel, to you. So how many substances have been KKDIK pre-registered and registered already? We've touched upon this already, but let's reiterate.
Yeah, just shortly to note, there are more than 256,000 KKDIK pre-registrations announced till now, submitted to the ministry. And ministry also informed that they received about 400 lead dossier submissions till now. This is the latest number.
Yes, yes. Thank you. And number 23. So I'll take this. So interested at the current state of KKDIK registration process. So this was covered in my previous slides. So I will just refer back to those and previous discussion, just to maybe note that at the moment, lead registrants are very active in preparing where there is a lead registrant. They're active in preparing the lead dossier and submitting this to the chemical, or the ministry in this case in Turkey, for the purpose of all other registrants being able then to join the joint submission and submit their co-registration. So the deadline is end of next year. So that is what everybody's aiming for, to have everything ready. And as it looks now, there are some worries related to the process and getting everything done by then. But let's keep at it and try our best. then number 24, oh, Sibel, if you can take this, so I'll just read it out. Any up-to-date information on the registration status of other companies, CIFs, and authorities? So I think you mentioned, well, you replied to this already, but
yeah, I can say that this is also, as mentioned, the status of the other companies, CIF and authorities. I can say that the pre-registration are ongoing. I provided the number of the pre-registration and the CFs. There are ongoing CFs, and then lead nomination process is ongoing also. And authority is trying to keep in touch with the lead registered companies so far. Yeah.
Thank you. And we'll take the question number 25. This also goes to you, Sibel. So question is, we are a non-Turkish manufacturer selling goods to a Turkish distributor. In that case, the importer is the distributor, right? What are my obligations?
Yeah, depending on the question, I can say that it is very important to define the KKDIK roles correctly. And in case you are selling the goods to the importer in Turkey, then the importer in Turkey is obligated to do the pre-registration and then the registration according to KKDIK requirements. Otherwise, as a non-Turkish manufacturer or formulator, you can also appoint an OR. I can say for this.
Thank you, Sibel. Okay, I'll move ahead. So 10 questions more or less to go. Or they will be a bit quicker to answer, except maybe for this and the next one after that. So what are the exemptions on the KKDIK? This was a question also, and Sibel touched upon this. I touched upon this in one of the answers, but there are different types of exemptions. So we have substances which are completely out of the scope of the KKDIK regulation. We have like waste, non-isolated intermediate substances in transport, radioactive substances, and other, these type of other substances as such, as you see in the slide, and also like radioactive substances, they have their own legislation. But then we have substances which are outside the scope of the KKDIK registration requirement, but they are within the scope of KKDIK. So these are, for example, foods and feeding stuffs, polymers. Again, they're in, but they don't need a registration except for the monomers. And then we have these certain substances in Annex 4, common non-hazardous substances, and certain substances mentioned in Annex 5 of the KKDIK regulation, such as substances occurring in nature that are not chemically modified, re-imported substances, recovered substances, medicinal products for human and veterinary use, and so forth. So these are out of the scope of the registration requirement, but inside the scope of the regulation as a whole. Then we have other special provisions like lesser registration requirements, which we touched upon already for on-site isolated intermediates, transported isolated intermediates. Then we have this PPOD notification possibility for substances under product and process-oriented research and development, and then also substances in plant protection and biocidal products shall be regarded as registered under KKDIK. So there are, depending on the type of substance, there are different exemptions. I hope this answers the question. Then question number 27, I'd like to learn more about KKDIK versus REACH, so EU REACH versus UK REACH. So this is also a consolidated question, 2 questions in one. So this is not, the point is not to cover UK REACH, but still it was questions, so we'll cover it quickly. So for example, pre-registrations, we had that in EU REACH, we don't have it anymore. In Turkey we have, in the UK we do not have. There's a doing approach, so downstream user import notification approach for GB-based importers of EU REACH registered substances. It's not the same as pre-registration, but I just wanted to mention it here. Inquiry, does it apply? Yes, in EU, yes in Turkey from 2024, and yes in UK REACH for all substances that are going to be registered, except for substances that have been grandfathered in. We'll not go into details what that means. I invite you to have a look at our UK REACH related webinars separately on that, or be in touch with us, of course. We're happy to help. The registration, yes, it's the same for all of these regulations, except of course in REACH, the deadlines have passed. In Turkey, they're end of next year, and in the UK, as mentioned earlier, excuse me, there are transitional arrangements in place for existing substances that were placed, that essentially have been placed on the UK market in 2019 and 20, meaning that these can benefit from doing and have later registration deadlines. And these registration deadlines are now under extension discussions, and as mentioned in the beginning of the presentation. So UK is a bit of a mixed bag, if you will, at the moment, but to be clarified as we go along. We will know much more in the fall what the registration deadlines look like, and if there is any hope of getting an updated registration process or a model, which doesn't look very good at the moment. Polymers, yes, same requirements across the line, except that in EU REACH, we're talking about this REACH review may require certain hazardous polymers to be registered, but that's for later. But for the moment, the requirements are the same across these regulations. Data requirements, again, the same requirements, except that maybe in the UK, if there's this alternative approach for registering substances, then it may be that for non-hazardous substances or substances of lesser concern, the data requirements will be much less. Joint registration applies in all, only representation applies in all, PPORD and R&D exemptions applies in all, product notifications is none of these have product notifications. Safety data sheets, of course, are regulated by all of these. In Turkey KKDIK will take over the regulation of safety data sheets from 1st of January 2024, when the GBF regulation ceases to exist. What the difference is that in Turkey, safety data sheets need to be certified. This does not apply in the UK or in EU REACH. And also in Turkey, dossiers need to be reviewed and certified by a person with a chemical assessment expert certification, a so-called KDU. This does not apply in the EU or the UK. So that was a long answer to a short question. Hope this helps. Okay, some general questions going forward. This goes to Sibel, to you. So does the agency, and this is a consolidated question again, does the agency have a plan to publish information about registered substances after the registration deadline, like the dissemination portal by ECHA?
Yeah, I can take this. Yes, the authority is planning to publish the dissemination page after the registration deadline, and the details on information which to be published are available in the regulation text under the relevant articles also.
Thank you, Sibel. Question number 29. The audit mechanism will work by 2024. For the trade products, the auditors will not know the product formulation. So how will the audit mechanism work fairly in the market? So this is a not entirely clear question, but if they are referring to inspections, then yes, of course, inspectors can go, for example, in case of an importer being covered by an only representative for a formulation, then of course they will check what the formulation is. They will check who is the only representative for a substance or substances as part of the formulation, and this they can see, because they can the only representatives need to inform who the customers are, so they can see that, and they can contact the only representative to check the coverage and compliance and take it from there. It will be quite laborsome, but it is possible for them, even without the downstream user importer knowing the composition of the chemical product in this case. So that is the answer, if I understood the question correctly. Then we have question number 30. What challenges, experience can you share based on the registration process so far? Sibel, do you want to take this?
Yes, I can. And shortly, it takes time to progress the lead dossier, especially a data sharing process may be a complex and time-consuming exercise for thus please proceed as soon as possible. And within this question, I also checked some of the questions here in the chat, and I can say that also for the dossier, lead dossier, there is no big manual check from the authority side. There is technical check, but they have some of the parts, for some of the parts, the manual check, but most of the dossiers have been checked technically by the authority. This is a side note. Yeah.
Thank you, Sibel. Good that you are able to look at the chat. I have not even touched upon that yet. Yeah. Okay, but anyway, going to question number 31. New substances in tonnage 1 to 10 may be introduced on the Turkish market in the coming years, I assume 2023. What steps would you take to comply with the KKDIK legislation? So obviously, we recommend doing all the KKDIK regulation work as soon as possible. So if you know you are now or very soon already starting to place these substances on Turkish market, I recommend you contact REACHLaw in this case, just to get things started on the right foot, because of course first we would have to, or whomever you choose to become your only representative where applicable, would have to of course pre-register the substance first and hope that someone else has taken the lead on this, so that you can then just buy a letter of access later on, or the only representative, and join the joint submission. If there is no lead registrant, then time is even more crucial. So it would be good to start as early as possible. But it is possible to prepare a lead dossier starting next year and have it done in time. It's all, of course, case dependent, but the more time we have, the more time the consultant you select has to preparing and helping you register these substances, the better. But I would recommend contacting REACHLaw, obviously in this case, to just maybe map the substances, check what the status is, and see if there are any issues. So that's my brief answer on that, maybe not so brief. So going forward, and this is the final slide with the present questions. Again, apologies for going over time. So the question number 32, Sibel, this goes to you. Going on miscellaneous questions on this and that subject. So the question is, would like to know the SVHC list from Turkey and exemptions? Short and complex question, I think. But yes, go ahead, Sibel.
Yeah, for the exemptions you already mentioned, and for the SVHC list, there is no specific list for Turkey, but just shortly also information from the authority side. Currently, the candidate list for authorization hasn't been published, but the ministry has started to work on the substances which will be added to the list, and authority will refer to the same substances in candidate list of authorization of REACH regulation while compiling the candidate list for Turkey. Then authority requested and waiting feedbacks from the companies in Turkish chemical industry. And then the candidate list will be published in 2024 after all evaluations are completed. This is for this part.
Thank you. And then let's quickly go to the next one, which I also ask you to have a look at or answer. So is the classification in EU, so EU CLP, equal to or similar to that in Turkey? Or is there some possibility that one substance has a different classification? Say that, please.
Yes, this is also a question covered in the chat box. Good to cover here. And then SEO regulation is adapted similar as the CLP regulation. ATPs 1 to 13, except 12th ATP. This is not covered. Additionally, 14th and 15th ATPs are not applicable for Turkey yet. This means that Some ATP differences can cause classification differences for the substances, and thus classification differences in STSs and levels as well, shortly to say.
Thank you, Sibel. And the next one, three next ones actually go still to you. So the first one is, as we know, poison center notification is already live across Europe. How and when does Turkey plan to adapt this regulation?
Yeah, shortly on this also. A poison center notification obligation will be in force at the beginning of 2025, according to the current article. And then planning a similar to UFI notification applied is in Europe. But application details have not been published by the authorities yet. No information. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Sibel. And then a quick question on PPORD. Why is this function not ready? Is the question.
Okay. Yes, this function is not active on the KKS yet. For those who want to submit PPORD, I suggest you to please apply to the ministry with an official letter. Just can I say, yeah.
Thank you, Sibel. And the final question for you, how does inquiry of the substance identity work according to the KKDIK criteria?
Yeah, for this one, the inquiries will start after the registration deadline, and the substance identity requirements are the same as the EU REACH inquiry requirements, so to speak here, yeah, shortly.
Thank you. Okay, and the last question, which was, to be honest, a bit, was not entirely sure what they mean or at what level. So the question is, can you please provide more clarity around substance groups? So if it comes to how substances are grouped, like through their physical chemical properties and stuff like that, then that is something that we will not cover here. It just goes way beyond the scope. If you mean sieves, so then the sieves essentially are formed when companies who have pre-registered the same substance essentially have agreed on the substance identity. There's no formal like, yes, now we agree on the substance identity. It's more like the lead registrant shares a substance, for example, a substance identity profile, and co-registrants, potential co-registrants are available or are able then to comment this and provide feedback, and hopefully the lead registrant take this into account and then adjust the substance identity profile. And once that has been essentially agreed upon, then a sieve is formed technically, and then you go forward in the lead registration process. Obviously, many things can happen in parallel, but this is essentially the way it works in theory. But then if you just ask about substance group, then UK REACH has substance groups, and those are the same or more or less the same as sieves, albeit these are created when someone has registered a substance through grandfathering or inquired. But I will not go into that in detail. But there we have substance groups by the name of substance groups. So that was why I was curious about the question. I think they mean sieves in this case. So then I answer the questions. Okay, so that was a long haul. Again, thank you for sticking with us if you have. So if I just take a few questions, Sibel, you were already kind to identify some questions in the chat. So if I find maybe a juicy one, then I can take those. And we have a lot of questions, so we will obviously not take all of these. So we'll come back to you by email, or maybe if we are very kind and have time on our hands, which we usually never have, we'll compile some sort of a Q&A document to share with the attendees of this webinar. But we'll see. So let's see. Let's see. Yeah, then we had a question on the here, do you have experience on how expensive the KKDIK law will be compared to EU law? So I think like for budgetary purposes, as I mentioned earlier, the some letter of accesses will be cheaper, some will be more or less the same, some will even be more expensive. And for some substances, I will not name any substances or consortia. Why they are becoming more expensive for Turkey is because they're essentially providing a fixed data set to be used in different regulations for more or less for the same fee. But in EU REACH, the work has already been done, so there is no added cost for work done. So for example, for Turkey, the fee will be the same, but it does not include the lead registrant work. So that will need to be added to the letter of access fee or the data access fee, which at the end of the day results in a higher letter of access cost. And just wanted to also mention that in some cases we're seeing, and quite a few actually of these cases, we're seeing situations where the co-registrant will have to buy two, essentially, letter of accesses. One from, for example, a consortium or a lead registrant in the EU, just for the data, and separately. And then a separate one from the Turkish lead registrant, covering essentially the work for preparing the dossier and stuff like that, and managing the joint submission. But to come back to the question, it really is substance specific. So if you want, you can always contact us directly, and we can see if we can give you some more details. But for budgeting purposes, I think if you budget for what they are for EU REACH or a bit less, I think you will not go over budget in most of the cases, at least. So as said, very case dependent. Let's see. So let's see. Yeah, there were quite the comments maybe or on the lead registration figures. Yeah, on the shortness of the existing registration. Then yeah, so I agree. So it is a short time to get all the all lead registrants nominated and the dossiers prepared and submitted, and all the co-registrants to join the joint submission and have those submitted by end of next year. I agree, it's a short timetable. I mean, it will be challenging. That is where, if you are now in a situation that you are contemplating whether to place substances on the Turkish market, whether you want to cover substance compliance by an only representative, then now is a good time to make up the decision, and even for you to take the lead role if it has not been taken already, because now is the time to act, I would say. Let's see, I'll take one more. Okay. So, Sibeli, if you want to take this, I'll just read the question. How is the lead registrant appointment taking place? Can people volunteer and steal the role, or is subject to clear and robust rules? So if you just go through the lead registrant appointment process quickly, then I think we conclude after that.
Yeah, it's actually the question I was looking just now. Yeah, how is
Good.
the lead registrant appointment taking place? For now, it's like you have to have like a good practice to just inform the CF members and then ask them for this lead role and wait them to respond to you if they have any obligation to this. And if not, you can just select your role in KKS. Here, different than the REACH IT, we have here the we can do some how can I say, you can ask if there is another lead registrant, then these two lead registrants can go together and ask the CF members for the votes, and voting can start, and they can do the voting system. And after this, if all goes well, one of these with higher votes can be the lead. But if they cannot be agree each other for the lead role, they can apply to the authority. And then can people volunteer and steal this role? It cannot be in that way. The authority asking them if there is any dispute between each other to just apply to the authority with an official letter, I can say. I hope this is just can provide some info on this.
Thank you, Sibel.
There is not clear rules on this.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. And actually, Sibel, I'll take this last question, because this is something we get a lot from our clients also. So the question is, do you know whether the KKS system will be upgraded in order to allow generation of printouts? This would help a lot to review dossier before submission. So if you want to take this one, which we come across very often due to practical reasons. So please.
Yeah. So many questions on this part, but as we know that the authority have this budget on the updating and maintaining this system, but they are not including these printout parts to the budget, and it's not included in the development process, and it will not be able to take printout according to the latest information from the authority side.
Thank you, Sibel. That would help, but to get the printouts. But at the moment, it's manual copy paste into Word or something.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so thank you very much for those of you stuck by all the way until the end. So we'll just do some closing remarks, and then we'll be done for today. So as mentioned, it's still possible to late pre-register. So if you haven't done that, do that as soon as possible. The registration phase has started. It has started already a long time ago, but now is the time to act, to become active, to register your substances. So after the registration deadline, as mentioned, if you need to place substances on the Turkish market and then you haven't registered, then you first have to inquire and submit a registration, and only once those have been accepted can you place a substance on the market in Turkey at 1 ton or more. And of course, non-Turkish manufacturers, formulators can choose a professional only representative in Turkey to take care of these KKDIK compliance obligations, registration, co-registration, lead registration. So please consider that. And very important, if there is no lead registrant yet, you need to take, I would say, extraordinary steps to find one, or then at the end of the day, become the lead registrant yourself, or through, of course, your only representative. And it is recommended to have clarity on this lead registrant role by end of this year, because time is getting really short. So no lead registrant equals no joint submission, equals no registration, equals no market from January 2024 and forward. Good to know. And of course, we stand ready to help and support you in all your KKDIK compliance efforts and more. So please feel free to contact us, and we are happy to provide, for example, quotations on any of our services and requirements that you may need. So please contact us at sales@reachlaw.fi, or then just, of course, be in direct contact with Sibel and myself, where you will see our contact details on the slide. So thank you very much for attending and sticking with us till the end, not the bitter end, but till the end. So with that, again, thank you. I wish you a very nice day and stay safe.